Well, hello and welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. My name is Valerie Kapocha. I'm a registered nurse, I'm a life coach, and I have a special interest in neuroscience and all things related to nutrition, obesity prevention, and general health promotion. Today, I thought it would be a great idea to review an article that I read from the Harvard School of Public Health website um, on vitamin B12. I'll be reading parts and I'll be discussing it with you as well. This topic is really important to me because I pursue a plant-based diet, and I've always heard that B12 deficiency is common in people who do, and I just thought I'd share this information with you. So I hope you're ready for it because I am. So vitamin B12 is also known as cobalamin, and it's naturally found in animal foods. It can also be added to foods in the form of supplements. People can also take vitamins as well that contain B12. B12 is needed to form red blood cells and DNA. So it's necessary for the formation of red blood cells and DNA, and it's also a key player in the function and development of the brain and nervous cells. So you can see right here that it is a really critical vitamin to be included in our diet. So what B12 does is it binds to protein in the foods that we eat. And then when it gets into the stomach, the hydrochloric acid and enzymes unbind B12 into its free form. And it's this free form of B12 that can be taken into the body. B12 also combines with a protein called intrinsic factor, so that it can be absorbed into the body. So just step back a few steps. You have B12 that binds with protein in the foods that we eat. When it gets into the stomach, hydrochloric acid and enzymes unbind the B12 into its free form. Then the free form of B12 combines with a protein called intrinsic factor so that it can be absorbed further down in the small intestine. So we can see that we have a number of steps that are necessary. We need the hydrochloric acid and we need the intrinsic factor. And also note that it combines to the protein in the foods that we eat. So it makes sense that when I tell you what the food sources are of B12, it will make perfect sense to you. Now, there are supplements and fortified foods that contain B12 in its free form, so they may be more easily absorbed. There are a variety of vitamin B12 supplements available on the market, and although there's been some debate about whether it's taken into the body better if you take an oral tablet or you take a sublingual tablet, meaning a tablet underneath the tongue that then dissolves, the research shows that there's not much difference between the two routes. So I think the most important thing here is that if you're not getting it from your diet, and we will discuss this a bit more in the latter part of this, if you're not getting it from your diet, then the recommendation is to supplement. And I'm going to say here, I'm not a doctor, I'm not prescribing, I'm just looking at the research and making some deductions. You can always check this with a clinician if you have any concerns. So in case of severe vitamin B12 deficiency due to inadequate intrinsic factor, for example, in pernicious anemia. So pernicious anemia is a condition where there is no intrinsic factor. So if there's no intrinsic factor in the body, let's remember intrinsic factor once the B12 has been unbound, intrinsic factor carries the B12 into the body. So if you have a condition where you don't have intrinsic factor, even if you gave somebody more and more B12 to eat, it still wouldn't be absorbed by the body. And in those cases, what they do is they advise B12 injections, intramuscular injections. Moving on, recommended daily amount of B12 for males and females over the age of 14 is 2.4 micrograms. For pregnancy, the RDA, or recommended dietary allowance, is 2.6 micrograms. And for breastfeeding women, it is 2.8 micrograms respectively. Because B12 is water soluble, they don't really give an upper limit for B12 because excess will be excreted. However, there is some evidence to suggest that if people are taking more than 25 micrograms per day, there is an increased risk of bone fractures. Okay, so at the end of this, in the information box, what I will do is actually cite this paper that I'm getting this information from, so that you can look at it and scrutinize it a bit more if you wish. Okay, so moving on. B12 plays a really important role in the prevention of cardiovascular disease. B12 is involved in the breakdown of a protein called homocysteine. And high levels of homocysteine are associated with increased risk of heart disease and stroke, as it promotes the formation of blood clots and excess free radicals in the cells, and so may impair normal blood vessel function. So a lack of B12 can increase homocysteine levels. Okay, and we've already seen that homocysteine can be quite divisive. Okay, there's also some research, although it's not really conclusive, about the link between high homocysteine levels. So there is definite research that shows that high homocysteine levels are linked with higher incidence of Alzheimer's disease. So we've got that research. However, when they did research to see if increasing the amount of B12 would decrease the incidence of Alzheimer's and cognitive dysfunction, there really wasn't a clear evidence that said that it could. However, research says that please don't rule out the link, and they're still looking into it to see if in the future they'll be able to find evidence that supports this. So let's have a look at the food sources of B12. They include fish and shellfish, liver, red meat, eggs, poultry, dairy products such as milk, cheese, and yogurt. And it's for this reason that people who are on a plant-based diet are advised to supplement, because really most of the high B12 sources are of the non-plant variety. However, B12 does exist in fortified nutritional yeast, and nutritional yeast can make a marvelous addition to your cooking. So add it to sauces, sprinkle it on top of things. It's really tasty and good for you. Also, fortified breakfast cereals and enriched soy and rice milk can also be good sources of vitamin B12. So now let's have a look at the signs of deficiency of B12. So they say that measuring the amount of B12 in the blood that is occurring is not the best way to determine if somebody's B12 deficient or not. Instead, what they do is they look at the levels of methylmalonic acid, which is a protein breakdown product, and also they look at homocysteine. And remember, before we said that high levels of homocysteine are associated with cardiovascular disease. So if those two, if methylmalonic acid is high and homocysteine is high, it shows that there is no B12 there, because what B12 helps to do is break this down. Now, the values increase with B12 deficiency. And would you believe it? It's estimated that up to 15% of the general population has a vitamin B12 deficiency. I just thought that's quite significant. So now let's look at factors that may cause B12 deficiency. First and foremost, the reason that brings me here today is the fact that people who are on a plant-based diet are at a higher risk of being B12 deficient than people who are meat eaters. So that's one reason. So they say vegetarians and vegans have a higher risk of having low B12 levels. And the advice in this paper is that people in this category should supplement. Okay, the other group of people who are at risk of developing B12 deficiency are people who lack intrinsic factor. So, as previously described, pernicious anemia is an autoimmune disease that attacks and potentially destroys gut cells, so that intrinsic factor is not present. And that's why earlier I said in this patient group, the doctors, what they actually do is they inject B12 intramuscularly. Okay, so that's one group. And they say also that if B12 deficiency ensues, other types of anemia and neurological damage may result. Even the use of high-dose B12 supplement will not solve this problem, as intrinsic factor is not available to absorb it. That makes sense, doesn't it? It makes perfect sense. Now, inadequate stomach acid or medications that cause decreased stomach acid can also be problematic in this area. And this is a much more common cause of B12 deficiency, especially in older people, because the production of hydrochloric acid may decrease. And it's estimated that 10 to 30% of adults over the age of 50 have difficulty in absorbing B12 from their food. People who regularly take medications that suppress stomach acid for conditions like gastroesophageal reflux disease, otherwise known as GERD, or peptic ulcer disease, such as proton pump inhibitors and H2 blockers and other antacids, may have difficulty absorbing B12 from their food, because these drugs can slow the release or decrease the production of stomach acid. And so people in this group, it's suggested that they can eat foods that have been enhanced, so that foods that have more B12. And also, if you have any concerns, please discuss this with your GP if you're in the UK, or with your physician if you're in America or any of the other places. Same thing, discuss it with your doctor. Okay, another reason why people may be deficient is intestinal surgery or digestive disorders that cause malabsorption. So anything that's going to interfere with the way that your stomach is either producing the hydrochloric acid, or anything that's going to interfere with the production of intrinsic factor, could potentially lead to decreased levels of B12. Examples of conditions, chronic conditions that could also have this effect, are Crohn's disease and celiac disease. So let's now look at the signs of deficiency. What could you see? So you can have megaloblastic anemia, and this is a condition of larger than normal sized red blood cells and a smaller than normal amount of red blood cells. And we said in the very beginning that B12 plays a vital role in the production of red blood cells. And so this megaloblastic anemia occurs because there is not enough B12 in the diet, or poor absorption. So that whole process of the formation of the red blood cells doesn't follow its desired route. Pernicious anemia, which is a type of megaloblastic anemia caused by lack of intrinsic factor, so that B12 isn't absorbed. So you've eaten it, but you just can't absorb it. Other signs of deficiency include fatigue and weakness, nerve damage with numbness, tingling in the hands and legs, memory loss, confusion, dementia, depression, and seizures. So, it's really important that we are aware of the need to have B12 in our diet, and if we're not having enough because we're eating plant-based diets, or if we're vulnerable due to any of the other factors that I discussed above, then supplementing it may be a good idea. As I said before, please speak to your doctor, or another healthcare professional for further information. So that brings us nicely to the end of my review of this article today. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I've certainly learned a lot just from looking through this research. Let's apply it to our lives. The aim is to live full, healthy lives, because after all, your health is your wealth. So until next time, take care of yourself. If you've enjoyed this, please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel, and share this with your friends and relatives, because we could all be a bit healthier, and I'd really appreciate your support. So take care until next time. Bye.